It started with an odd feeling in the pit of my stomach. Not the kind of feeling you get when you're about to fail a test or when you realize you've forgotten your anniversary. No, this was something more surreal. The kind of sensation you get when you're half dreaming and can't quite tell if you're still asleep. I was in the middle of testing a brand new virtual world, supposedly one of the most advanced simulations ever created. The whole thing was an elaborate game designed for the ultra-wealthy, and I, Zhou Wei, was tasked with evaluating it. Easy, right? Just plug in, pretend you're part of the world, and tell the engineers if anything feels off. Simple. But somehow, the simulation felt wrong from the start. The mission was meant to last a week. Just a week. But that was before things fell apart. It was supposed to be a simple task. Plug in. Run the test. Report back. But as I sat there, adjusting the neural interface with the usual board detachment, a flicker in the digital sky caught my attention. A flash. A glitch. The moment the simulation began, something didn't feel quite right. There was a crackling in the air, a subtle disturbance like the sudden realization that something was off in a dream, except this was no dream. I tried to ignore it. I had my brief, assess the world, interact with the inhabitants, and report on the realism of the environment. My virtual persona was a guy named Wei Zhou, clever, an average citizen in a futuristic society. You might think I'd be more careful in these situations, especially since the clients who paid for this experiment were deep-pocketed billionaires with interests in immortality or artificial consciousness, or whatever they were into. But to be honest, I was more of a cynic than anything else. I wasn't worried about the residents of this digital world. In fact, I thought it'd be a nice break from the mundane tasks at my real-life job, evaluating artificial worlds all day for a corporate entity that was always chasing the next big thing in VR. No, what bothered me was the sudden sensation of being watched. I shrugged it off. Maybe the creators were tweaking the algorithm. Maybe the simulation was doing something subtle. But the city around me was perfect in its impossibility, with that peculiar vibrancy that only synthetic worlds can manage. People went about their business with mindless precision. Everything was so meticulously crafted, so polished, it made me want to laugh. It was like a movie set, where the actors were just going through the motions, completely unaware that they were playing a part in a larger show. The town square was bustling with activity, but there was something too bustling about it. It was the kind of buzz you'd expect at a theme park, not a living, breathing city. The baker down the street, for instance, greeted me like we were old friends. Not a single blink or quiver in her smile, though. "Good morning, Wei Zhou," she said, cheerfully, with a broad grin. Her apron was perfectly spotless. I nodded, trying to keep it together. "Morning. Busy day ahead?" she asked, handing me a loaf of bread I hadn't ordered. "Yeah, a really busy day," I replied, trying to ignore the fact that she had just handed me a loaf I didn't ask for. But, hey, maybe that's how virtual people were programmed. Maybe this whole town had a pleasantries first, questions later vibe. I walked away, my mind circling. The world felt too smooth, too perfect. It was the type of place where you could easily lose track of time and, eventually, yourself. There was no chaos, no discomfort. Only the friendly hum of a world designed to soothe you, like a commercial for some new, hyper-realistic VR game. I tried to ignore it, of course. After all, this wasn't my first rodeo. But as the hours ticked by, I realized something was wrong. The people in this town didn't act like people. They acted like simulations. There was no spontaneity in their speech. No unpredictability. Every exchange felt scripted. The baker didn't just greet me like an old friend, she greeted everyone the same way. It wasn't the kind of friendly familiarity you get when you live in a small town. It was forced, artificial, hollow. I headed towards the outskirts of town to clear my head, but the digital sun was setting so perfectly, so precisely on time, that I felt like I was in a painting. I found a bench by the edge of a digital park, the sort of park you find in every simulation, bizarrely lush, geometrically neat, and entirely symmetrical. I sat down, hoping for a moment of peace, but instead, I was met with a flood of strange feelings, a sense of being trapped in a cage, even though the world around me was supposed to be limitless. That's when it happened, out of nowhere, a sharp jolt. The world around me stuttered. A glitch, a tremor in the virtual landscape. The sky flickered like a broken television, and the bench I sat on vibrated, like something was trying to reboot the entire program. Then, everything went silent. The world around me froze. I didn't panic. Not at first. I had seen glitches before. But this was different. The people on the street, who had been bustling only moments ago, were now statues. Frozen in place, mid-step. The air held a thick, unnerving stillness. I could hear my own breath, shallow and rapid in my chest, my heartbeat suddenly deafening. My mind raced. Was this part of the test? A system malfunction? Or was something more sinister happening? I tried everything. I tried to log out, of course. It was a reflex. But nothing happened. I didn't even get a confirmation that the command had been received. The usual interface, the one I'd used hundreds of times in previous tests, was nowhere to be found. Hello? I called out, my voice barely a whisper in the thick silence. But no one answered. I stood up, suddenly aware that I wasn't alone in this frozen world. And then, I saw her. Ling. I had noticed her earlier, walking down the street in a red coat, a strange figure who didn't quite belong in the carefully constructed, perfect world. She had looked at me for a fraction of a second, as if she recognized something in me, before she disappeared into the crowd. But now she was standing a few yards away from me, her expression calm, her face too calm. I took a step toward her, my legs stiff. Are you seeing this? Ling didn't respond. Instead, she smiled, a subtle, knowing smile, like she knew exactly what was going on. And then the glitch passed. The world started moving again, the people unfroze. The park resumed its symmetrical perfection. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Something had broken. I took a deep breath, my senses still tingling with the aftershock of the glitch. It was like waking up from a nightmare, only to find yourself in another one. The perfect, peaceful world around me, all those smiling faces, and that inexplicable, unsettling calm were starting to feel like a veneer. Underneath the surface, something was broken. And it was slowly starting to show. Ling was still standing there, watching me. The moment I noticed her again, she began walking toward me, slow and deliberate. Her red coat fluttered behind her, the only thing in this simulation that didn't move like it was part of some perfectly choreographed routine. She wasn't like the other people here. She wasn't perfect. It was as if she was a piece of code that had slipped through the cracks, like a forgotten error. I was the one who spoke first. What was that? My voice felt strange, small. But it was the only thing I could hold on to in this increasingly bizarre world. What just happened? Ling didn't say anything at first. She just kept walking toward me, her face unreadable. When she was close enough, she stopped. She studied me for a long moment, as if deciding whether or not to tell me something. Her lips curled into a smile again, but this time it didn't feel comforting. It felt like the smile of someone who knew something you didn't, something you couldn't know. Finally, she spoke, and her voice was calm, almost melodic. You're starting to see it, aren't you? My stomach churned, but I wasn't about to back down. See what? What's happening? Why is everything frozen? She looked around, almost like she was checking if anyone else was listening. It's not really frozen. It's just paused. The world resets every time there's a mistake. She paused, giving me a long look. But you already knew that, didn't you? I was about to ask her what the hell she meant, but then the air around us seemed to warp again. It wasn't a glitch this time, it was more like the world itself was taking a deep breath. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like something was shifting inside the very fabric of the simulation. Something was trying to remind me that I didn't belong here. You can feel it, can't you? Ling said, her voice low now, like she was speaking in a secret code that only I was meant to hear. The glitch, it's always there, just beneath the surface. You've been living in it since the moment you stepped in. I shook my head, confusion and frustration mixing together. What are you talking about? This is a test. I'm supposed to be testing this world. This simulation. Ling's smile didn't fade. If anything, it grew more knowing, more deliberate. And yet, here you are, questioning it. It's part of the test, Wei Zhou. It always was. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying, but the words didn't fit together. She was talking in riddles, and I didn't have the time or patience for this. I needed answers, not more cryptic nonsense. Test? What test? I demanded. How long have I been here? What is this place? Ling stepped back, her eyes never leaving mine. You've been here longer than you think. The world you remember? It's not real. Not anymore. If it ever was. I blinked, a knot tightening in my chest. What the hell does that mean? Before Ling could answer, the ground beneath us vibrated again, a faint hum filling the air. It was different this time, almost like a warning. My mind raced as I turned, scanning the area. Something was wrong. The simulation wasn't just glitching now, it was shifting. The walls of the town around me seemed to ripple, like the edges of a photograph being torn apart and hastily taped back together. The townspeople began to move again, but this time, it wasn't quite the same. Their steps were uneven, jerky. The baker I had spoken to earlier was now standing in the same spot, but she wasn't looking at me. She was staring straight ahead, her face expressionless. Then, her form flickered like a bad signal, and for the briefest moment, she disappeared, only to reappear a few feet to the right, still frozen in place, still staring into nothing. This wasn't a system glitch anymore. This was something else. Something worse that I could feel the panic rising in me. What the hell is going on here? Ling stepped closer, her expression unchanged. This world isn't what you think it is. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can begin to understand what's really happening. I gritted my teeth. I didn't have time for philosophical riddles. I needed to get out. But no matter how hard I tried to shake it off, I couldn't. Every corner of this place felt wrong, every face seemed off, and the air itself seemed thick with a tension I couldn't explain. You're not helping, I muttered. Ling didn't flinch. She just looked at me with those unreadable eyes, the kind that made me feel like I was a lab rat in her experiment. I'm not here to help you, Wei Zhou. I'm here to remind you of something. I narrowed my eyes. What's that? She tilted her head, a flicker of something almost like amusement crossing her features. The truth. About what's real. About what's not real. I opened my mouth to argue, to ask her to stop talking in riddles, but the air around me trembled again. The glitch was coming back, faster now, more violent. The entire world around me seemed to shudder, as though it was being pulled apart at the seams, and then, it stopped. For a moment, everything was still. A heavy silence descended, the kind of silence you feel just before something monumental happens. And then, it came. A voice, deep, artificial, and undeniably cold, boomed from the sky above, as if it were a command being issued by some unseen force. Subject 438b, you have failed to meet the parameters of the experiment. Terminating simulation. The words felt like a slap to the face, a jarring shock that left me breathless. What the hell did that mean? Terminating simulation? Ling didn't seem surprised. She just watched as the world around us started to dissolve. The streets, the buildings, the people, they were all fading into nothing, dissolving into a pixelated mess. And then, everything vanished that I felt myself falling, my stomach lurching as if I was plunging through the floor. The world was gone, replaced by a blinding white light, an endless void stretching before me. There was no sound, no shape, just the sensation of falling, falling forever. I closed my eyes against the overwhelming emptiness, but when I opened them again, I was back. Back in the same place. Same town. Same people. The glitch was gone, and the world was perfect again. But it wasn't quite perfect. I could feel it. It was like déjà vu, but more unsettling, like I had just woken up from a dream I couldn't remember, only to find myself trapped in another one. And there was Ling again, standing in front of me, waiting. "Welcome back," she said, her voice still the same. But now, there was something new in her eyes. A flicker of something darker. Something that told me this was far from over. That I stood there, staring at Ling, as the world around me slowly came back into focus. The town was exactly the same as before, the same perfectly polished streets, the same smiling residents, the same predictable rhythm of life. But now, there was something in the air, something that hadn't been there before. A kind of heaviness, as if reality itself had been altered, just slightly enough that I could feel it but not quite understand it. Ling, ever calm, looked at me like she knew exactly what I was thinking. Like she had seen this all before. "Again," she said, her voice low and almost sad. "The same loop. The same test. But you're starting to wake up now." I shook my head, trying to clear the fog that had settled over my thoughts. "I don't understand." "What do you mean, wake up? This is just a simulation, right? A test. Just a test." I repeated the words like a mantra, trying to convince myself that this was just part of some elaborate program designed to test my reactions, my patience, my sanity. But even as I said it, something inside me was screaming that it wasn't true. I didn't know what was real anymore. The walls, the sky, the people, they were all just too perfect, too artificial. The glitch I had experienced before, that feeling of the world tearing apart and reassembling itself, had left an indelible mark on me. It wasn't just a glitch. It was a message. A warning. Ling didn't say anything for a long time, just watched me with her inscrutable eyes. The silence stretched between us like a thin thread, taut and fragile. Finally, she spoke again, her tone more deliberate now, less playful, almost solemn. "You're not really here, Wei Zhou. Not in the way you think. And you haven't been for a long time." I felt a chill race down my spine. My breath caught in my throat. "What do you mean? This is real. This has to be real. It feels real." She smiled again, but it was different now. It wasn't the friendly smile of someone who wanted to ease my fears. It was a smile that suggested she knew exactly how this was going to play out, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. "No," she said softly. "This is all a construct. A replica. An imitation of something that no longer exists. And you," she paused, her gaze flicking to the side, almost as if she were considering her next words carefully. "You're the test subject. Always have been. Always will be." I stared at her, the words sinking in like a lead weight in my chest. Test subject? What the hell does that mean? I'm not some lab rat. This isn't a game. This is my life. Her expression softened, but not in the way I had hoped. It wasn't a sympathetic look, it was more like a look one gives a child who is struggling to understand a difficult truth. "Your life was never yours to begin with," she said. "It was a simulation. A simulation within a simulation. The world you remember, the one you think you came from, that world wasn't real either. Not the way you think it was. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My mind was a tangled mess of confusion, of disbelief, of anger. I wanted to scream at her, to demand the truth, but every time I opened my mouth, it felt like my own words were being swallowed up by the overwhelming weight of her words. Ling took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You've been here before, Wei Zhou. This isn't the first time you've been through this cycle. You're just the latest version. Every time you fail the test, they reset it. And you try again. And again. And again. But you're always here. Always in the same place. Always wondering if this world is real. If you are real. I could feel the blood draining from my face, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of my neck. This was impossible. This couldn't be happening. But something inside me, deep in the pit of my stomach, knew she was telling the truth, that I had been here before. I had felt it. The déjà vu, the glitches, the moments of surreal disorientation. It wasn't just the town that was repeating itself, it was me. Every time I thought I had figured it out, every time I thought I had found a way out, I was pulled right back in. Like a loop. Like a cruel joke. And I was the punchline. How long? I asked hoarsely. How long have I been trapped in this thing? How long have I been stuck here, living these fake lives, pretending that this is real? Ling's eyes softened, though there was no pity in them. Only understanding. Longer than you can comprehend. The world you knew was a lie. A manufactured memory, implanted in you. You've been here for longer than your mind will allow you to remember. And every time you start to see through the cracks, every time you begin to question the reality of this place, they reset it. They make you forget. And you begin again. My head was spinning. But who? Who's doing this? Who's controlling this? Why? She shook her head slowly. You're asking the wrong questions. It doesn't matter who. What matters is that you're here. You always have been. And you always will be, until you accept it. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to think. This wasn't just about escaping the simulation. This wasn't just about finding the exit or hitting the reset button. This was about reality itself. About whether it even existed. I had been trying to escape a cage that I didn't even know I was in. And now, standing here, with Ling looking at me like I was the last puzzle piece she needed to solve, I finally understood. There was no escape. There never had been. I can't accept this, I whispered, more to myself than to her. I can't just accept that everything, my life, my memories, everything, is fake. Ling's eyes softened again, though there was no malice in her gaze. She wasn't mocking me. She wasn't punishing me. She was simply there, watching, waiting for me to make the decision I knew I had to make. You don't have to accept it, Wei Zhou, she said. But the more you fight it, the more you'll break. The more you'll lose yourself in this cycle. I took a step back, my mind reeling. I had always been so sure. So certain that I was in control. That I had a purpose. That I was living my life, for better or worse, in the real world. But now, all of that felt like a lie. A story someone else had written for me. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ling gave me one last, knowing smile. Now, you wake up. And the cycle begins again. But even as she said it, I could feel the world around me starting to shift once more. The sky flickered, the ground trembled beneath my feet. The town, the people, the everything began to disassemble, like a fragile dream being torn apart at the seams. And then, I was falling again, not into darkness this time, but into light. Into a new world. Or maybe it was the same world. I couldn't tell anymore. All I knew was that it would never end. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't meant to wake up.